When Muhammad was about 25 years old, he had a major change in his life. A wealthy widow, older woman named Khadija, asked him to take her caravans into Syria for her.
Muhammad took all her goods and went with the caravan to Syria and did an incredible job. And her respect for him turned into admiration for him, and she inquired about him through one of her friends.
Shortly thereafter, Khadija asked Muhammad to marry her. "I like you because of our relationship," she said, "and your high reputation among your people, your trustworthiness, good character, and truthfulness."
And this is interesting because she's a very beautiful woman, but she's 40. She's moving into her maturity, and he's a 25-year-old youth. He's an orphan, and he accepts this proposal, and it's arranged through the family, and he does indeed marry her.
And people have often said rather sneeringly that this was just a marriage of convenience on his part. He'd just married the wealthy widow for his own gain and profit. But there's no doubt in my mind that he deeply, deeply loved Khadija.
Over the course of their marriage, Khadija and Muhammad had 4 daughters and 2 sons who died as infants. He was a family man and a successful and respected merchant. But as Muhammad approached his own 40th birthday, he was becoming increasingly restless and troubled by the problems of Meccan society.
Within a few generations, they had gone from this kind of brutal existence in the Arabian steppes to becoming financiers, bankers, businessmen, merchants with a lot of money. And this was great, of course, and people were delighted, but it was a very disturbing time because the market economy demanded, as we know only too well in the West, a strong competitive streak. People no longer felt that they had to take care of the poor and the needy and the weaker members of Quraysh any longer. They had to make as much money as they possibly could.
They had a marvelous society. They had a trading town. They were booming. They were doing business. They were living like an affluent society. And when you have an affluent society, the tendency is to become hedonistic, to look at, what are the pleasures of life?
Muhammad would often retreat to the mountains outside Mecca to meditate. It was on one such retreat in the year 610 that Muhammad had an experience that would transform history.
The Prophet used to retire from time to time into a hill called Jabal al-Nur, the mountain of light. When you climb up that mountain, and many people still do it, on top of it is a cave called Al-Hira in Arabic, into which the Prophet would oftentimes retire in order to contemplate and to pray and to be still with God. The coming of the revelation was an immediate act. The descent from heaven came suddenly.
Muhammad was woken from sleep and felt himself absolutely enveloped by a terrifying divine presence. He says it's an angel that seemed to squeeze him in a devastating embrace, and it felt as though all the breath was being squeezed out of his body, and a voice said to him, "Recite." And Muhammad said, "No, I am not a reciter." The voice again said, "Recite. Recite." And then squeezed, as he said, almost beyond his endurance, Muhammad felt the first inspired words of a new scripture in Arabic pouring from his lips.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. That is, recite in the name of thy Lord who created.
And Islam had come into being.
And the Prophet, of course, having received the divine word, began to tremble and tremendous fear, because there's no common ground between the human reality and the divine reality. He ran out of the cave. When he ran out of the cave, he looked back, and the archangel filled up the whole of the sky.
Everywhere you looked, there was Gabriel. Not just a single angelic image, but a presence, a being, a power. This is how the ineffable, incomprehensible, utterly transcendent, indescribable God makes itself known to us.
This was something that really shook him to the very core of his being. And he goes down from that mountain and he is shaking. And I think it's shock. Here's somebody who's gone looking for this transcendent reality, and this transcendent reality is now replying.
Muhammad was so shaken by this experience, he feared he might be possessed. He ran home directly to Khadija.
And there he flung himself into her lap, and he said, cover me, hold me, until the terror had passed. Khadija was the person who reassured him. He said, have I become a kahin, a soothsayer? And she said, no, my dear, this is not what God does. This revelation comes from God.
The message Muhammad received on the Mountain of Light was simple. He was to recite the words of the one true God. But Muhammad still had doubts that his experience was genuine.
Khadija thought it would be a good idea to go to consult her cousin, Waraka, who was a Christian.
She's saying, we need to go to somebody that knows about these things. Because if you're told you're being given a message from God, well, there have been previous messages. So let's go ask Waraka, who knows the scripture. He knows the Torah and the gospel.
And as soon as Waraka heard about this, he immediately said, Muhammad is the prophet who will bring the revelation of the one God to the Arabs. And he warned Muhammad that he would have a really rough time.
He says, your people are going to reject you and they will chase you out of this city. This has never come to any human being except they were persecuted, because this is basically undermining the paradigm.
And after a while, Muhammad began to realize that the messages he was receiving fit a pattern that he knew about from Jewish and Christian tradition as well, and that is that there are such things as prophets. There are people who receive messages from the divine, and that he began to realize that indeed he was one of them as well.
When we think of prophecy, we come from a tradition in America where we think of Charlton Heston, you know, with a great big beard, and the wind's always blowing, and he's wearing raggedy clothes, and they're ranting people, you know, they're ranting, raving. In the Islamic view, a prophet isn't this kind of person at all, but it's a person who has been selected very reluctantly from his people. God selected them, and they couldn't get out of the clutches in the sense they had to do it.
You have to think in terms of a tribal Bedouin society. What is the worst thing that could happen to somebody? It is not death. It is shame. And so I'm sure that in his own mind, the idea of being shamed was probably very important. And think of the double loss of face. You know, he's going to lose face, he's going to be shamed in front of his people, and he's going to be shamed in front of Allah who gave him that message.
One of the drawing features to me as a non-Muslim who came from just a very diverse background was his humility and his humanness.